Now I'd like to hand the mic over to the director of the Wallace Center at Winrock International and Community Food Enterprise Project Co-Director, Dr. John Fisk, for a formal introduction to the webinar and to the Community Food Enterprise Project.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is John Fisk, and I'm the director of the Wallace Center, as Jeff said. Let me just tell you a little bit about the Wallace Center, the National Good Food Network, and its webinar, and then we'll launch right into this particular webinar. The Wallace Center is a national nonprofit that employs a market-based approach to building what we call a 21st century food system that's healthy for people, healthy for the environment, and healthy for the economy. The National Good Food Network, as Jeff mentioned, is one initiative of the Wallace Center. And the NGFN works it integrates the work of the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector to foster what we call needed value chains and relationships and infrastructure for bringing more good food to more people. Marty Gorenser, who's on the call with us today, will tell us more about the National Good Food Network, so I won't go into that. The webinar is a regular series that we have on the third Thursday of each month. Today's webinar, Community Food Enterprises, is the focus. And welcoming us today will be Michael Shuman, Mike Lorentz, and as I mentioned, Marty Gorenser. So what I'm gonna do is give you a background on the Community Food Enterprise project, and then I'll introduce Michael Shuman, who will talk about the findings and some of the lessons we've learned there, and then Mike Lorentz, who's one of the enterprises featured in the book. Called Laurence Meats, will talk in detail about his particular enterprise and what he's learned and offer some insights. And then Marty will follow up with some information about how this work links to the National Good Food Network and what that's about. So let's see here. Sorry about that. Okay, so overall, the purpose of this particular piece of work was really to do the research that would build a case for locally owned strategies, locally owned enterprise strategies. In food work and in community-based food work, I think there's a lot of thinking and a lot of strategy that's based perhaps not on data, but on what we want to be. And so we felt, as we scale this up and reach more success, we're going to be more challenged. So it's important to build a solid, informed basis upon which to base our arguments. So that was really the underlying goal here. Excuse me. A second piece of the work was to build a network of community food enterprises around the world. So really, once we find these groups that are doing innovative work, and having positive social and economic and environmental outcomes, that we link them together. So we create a platform for learning and interchange, and not just among the 24 that we've researched, but hoping to grow that even into a larger community. I just want to acknowledge support for the work from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So what is a community food enterprise? Now, this isn't necessarily a very rigid definition, but it's a working definition. And it's the way that we, kind of the criteria that we use to select and view and build our argument here in the work. First and foremost, that it is an enterprise, that it's not just a nonprofit endeavor or project. It's designed to be an enterprise that has a positive cash flow. Now, it can take, as I'll mention later, it can take many different forms, but that's an underlying necessity. Second, that it can work anywhere across the food chain, value chain. It can be in production, it can be in processing, distribution, marketing, retail, and a variety of places. Local ownership was a key underlying criteria, and what we mean by that is that that it's more than 50% owned by people in the immediate geographic area, meaning that they'll have a close-by relationship to their investment as opposed to a distant, more removed one. Local control, that most of the legal rights and responsibilities of actually running and handling that business are in local hands. Again, a more proximate relationship to the investment. And I also wanted to point out that we were we were looking for a variability in size. I think when people hear community food enterprise, they are a bit biased towards a small enterprise or a local market, when in fact, there's a lot of good examples around that are quite large or quite small that have local markets and non-local markets. And oftentimes we find a mix of that is what is one of the keys of success. Well, let's see. Okay. Oops. Again, going back to building the case, I wanted to just let you know some of the assumptions we had about local ownership for economic development and why this strategy is attractive. There's a growing body of literature that talks about local ownership and its strong performance in terms of economic multiplier. That it creates a strong economic multiplier, between 1.5 to 2, such that you're keeping the dollars in the community and actually building local wealth. In addition, local ownership means that the company's rooted in the place, that it's not really going to go anywhere, and that usually they produce wealth for many years. Also, we find that rather than flee the situation and move to another location where perhaps taxes are less or employment or the required treatment of employees is lower, things like that, or environmental performance can be lower, they generally adapt to the rising performance, therefore increasing the quality of the community. In addition, it's easier to promote smart growth, draw tourists, attract young and talented people, and build self-reinforcing cultures with local ownership. And in addition, we find that they lead to greater social stability and interconnectedness in the community, and higher job rates, therefore lower welfare and more political participation. So I think they offer a lot, and it was really worth looking at them as a strategy. Now, specifically, the activities in this project that I want to let you know about, one of our goals was to collect innovative examples from around the globe. So initially, what we chose to do was to collect 24 examples over time. We plan to have many more. But right now we picked 12 domestic, 12 international, from a variety of submissions and opportunities that we had. Another piece was to increase awareness of this strategy for replication. And so once we started getting some of the research done and we've got the document and the website that's up, we use social media approaches to get it out to targeted audiences such as funders, such as agency people, and a lot of practitioners. So we really, rather than have it just be a nice piece of research on the shelf, one of our initial goals was to make it an active body of research. For example, next week we have a national event in Washington, D.C., and you'll see the webcast link there if any of you want to participate in that. That'll feature some of the international projects, some of the domestic projects, and Michael and myself will be there as well as some others. In addition, part of this moving the information out was to foster a community of practice, including these enterprises, including many more across the globe, which is our next phase of the work. And so just some details in number 3 around this international community of practice, having some real-time technical assistance, some face-to-face opportunities, and then having a robust website. Just a bit about methodology. As I mentioned, we had hundreds of cases to really choose from when we did the initial scan. And so in order to try to narrow that down to a manageable level, we tried to pick a diverse set of projects. A diverse set of different legal structures, whether they be partnerships or cooperatives or public-private partnerships. Really we tried to sample all of those. Again, we picked some large and some small. We tried to diversify the role across the food chain so that we're not just focused on production or just on retail, or just on food service all the way across. And again, we tried to distribute across the U.S. and also to distribute in different parts of the world. What you see here is the list that we had chose. I'll just kind of go through the domestic list. Anna Marie Seafood in Louisiana, Appalachian Harvest in Virginia, and actually multi-state there, but they're located in Virginia. Crop Cooperative, which has the Organic Valley brand out of Wisconsin. Green Markets, which runs all the farmers markets in New York City. Indian Springs Farmers Association, which is a producers cooperative. Lorentz Meats, who were featured today, meat processor out of Minnesota. Oklahoma Food Cooperative, which is a partnership between growers and consumers. Swanton Berry Farm, which is a primary production unit, fruits and vegetables in California. I think we've got a typo there, but it's the Intervale Center in Burlington, Vermont, which is a training ground in an organic production area in an urban setting. Weaver Street Market in North Carolina has a number of cooperative retail stores. White Dog Cafe, again, is a restaurant, also has links to the community to a foundation there. And Zingerman's Community of Businesses, which really defies definition, but has a series of 7 or 8 businesses, all interconnected, including retail and primary production of, say, bread and things like that. Internationally, a whole range of similar type things, some with primarily export markets and a few more that are more primary producers, but still a range. When it came to saying, how they do economically, we could ask for their books, we could review their books and do that, but when it came to judge how these organizations were doing socially and environmentally, that became a bit more of a trick. And so we chose to take a tool that was on the shelf, basically, and employ it for the study, and that's called the B Corp Survey, which is, I think, in its second reiteration right now, and it's proving to be quite useful as companies that want to illustrate to the world their social and environmental performance. And so we use that tool with all 24 of our cases, which helps to reveal and kind of score these 8 facets that you see there all across products that they produce. Are they healthy? The practices that they use, are they environmentally sound? How do they treat their employees? Is there profit sharing? Is there leadership? And how interactive is it and responsible is it to the employees? Labor practices, community involvement, interaction with consumers, and environmental performance. And so we found that quite useful. Both for I think the enterprises found it useful, but we also found it useful to kind of get a scale of comparing the economic performance to these other performances. Wrapping up, before I introduce Michael, the next steps that we have is to really build this robust community of practice and continue to do the outreach on the current set of research that we have. Additionally, there are a couple other networks out there, the National Good Food Network being one and the BALLE network being another, domestically here, that strive to serve a similar purpose. And so our future plan is to integrate this work with those networks to make both of those even more robust to build this piece out. And I think Marty's going to say a little bit more about the NGFN later, and I'm sure Michael will mention BALLE a bit. So with that, let me end my little production here and introduce Michael Shuman, who will take us into what we found in the study. Michael Shuman is the Director for Research and Public Policy for the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, or BALLE. He's an economist, an attorney, an author, and an entrepreneur. Michael's one of the nation's leading experts on community economics and the advantages of small-scale businesses in an era of globalization. He's an author as well of 7 books, including The Small Mart Revolution and Going Local. He's a prolific speaker, speaking to local governments and universities and others across the country for the past 25 years. He's lectured in 45 states and 8 countries. We're pleased to have him with us today, and it was really fun and productive working with him on this particular project. So, Michael, take it away.
Thank you, John. Great to be here. Thank you all for taking a little time out of your day to spend some time with us here. As John mentioned, I work for an organization called BALLE, which many of you know. It stands for the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. And BALLE was founded in 2001 to help communities build networks of local enterprises and use those networks of enterprises as sort of a critical mass for reviving their economies in what we call a local living way. BALLE now is active in about 80 communities in North America, and I think what's significant is that nearly all of BALLE, all of these networks have prominent local food businesses sort of at their core of operation. Now, what I'm going to try to do in about 20 minutes' time is just run through the big headlines, the 5 biggest headlines of the findings from our report, and then give you just a flavor of 2 other points in the findings. One is that local businesses, local food businesses, are using some really interesting strategies for becoming more competitive. And then another point is that many of the challenges that these community food enterprises face in fact have become platforms for their being very creative, addressing those challenges and turning that liability into an asset. One thing I would say is that if at the end of this webinar you do nothing else, if you just read the 20 pages of the findings, that will really give you a good flavor of everything else, and then you can kind of pick and choose what case studies are of greatest interest to you. So there are 5 big findings that I think are worth talking about here. John covered the first very briefly, and that is that we tried to draw a distinction and in a way raise people's consciousness that local food is not just about the proximity of a farmer to the point of distribution, because if that's all that local food were about, we would be delighted that Walmart was distributing lots of local food from farmers, and some of us might be. But at the end of the day, I think most practitioners in this movement believe that locally owned businesses are critically important in this equation because they are tied up with economic development. Just to elaborate on one of the points that John made, I have a graph here some of you may have seen from a kind of key study that was done in Austin, Texas in 2002, looking at the impact of $100 spent at a non-local Borders bookstore versus $100 spent at a local bookstore called Book People. And it turned out that $100 spent at the Borders left $13 in the local economy. $100 spent at the local bookstore left $45 in the local economy. So roughly speaking, you buy the same book at the same price at the local enterprise, and you get 3 times the jobs, 3 times the income and the wealth effects, 3 times the tax proceeds. And there have now been done a dozen studies along these lines, and while the numbers vary a little bit from study to study, as one would expect, the conclusions are identical and very robust, and that is that local ownership matters for economic development because locally owned businesses spend more of their money locally. And as John mentioned, that ties in with a lot of other features of economic development: tourism, smart growth, entrepreneurship. It also means that the carbon footprint of locally owned businesses is smaller because they're buying the inputs to the business locally. Now, the second big finding I think that is important is that we tend to think of local businesses as small, often tiny mom and pops. And in point of fact, there are a lot of locally owned businesses that are huge. And just wanted to mention a couple to kind of stretch our imaginations about what we think of as local. So John mentioned that one of our case studies is Organic Valley, or crop. And Organic Valley really has about 1,300 farmers, and they're involved in nearly all of the states in the United States. And the organization, which is a producer cooperative, basically does about $500 million worth of business a year. Now, some people might say, gee, this is not really a local enterprise. This is a national enterprise. But our feeling is that because crop is controlled by farmers, local farmers who control their own enterprises, and they in turn are essentially the power base of this enterprise, that this is not really a local enterprise, this is not a global enterprise, this is a service vehicle for 1,300 local farmers. I'll give you another example of where local is not small. We have a couple of really big local businesses internationally that we talked about. Sunstar in India produces and largely exports rice, some conventional, some basmati. They have about 240 employees, and their annual revenues are almost $100 million a year. In Sri Lanka, Cargill's PLC is a network of 138 supermarkets. Now, again, why is this local? Well, Sri Lanka is about the size of West Virginia. It's a family-owned company. They have 5,600 employees. Their annual revenues are well over $100 million. And this company actually has linkages with about 10,000 farmers in Sri Lanka and 2,000 small and medium-sized enterprises. The third point to make here is that local businesses, local food businesses, are becoming increasingly competitive. Now, one reason we tend to think that local and small businesses are not so competitive is that we're looking at the wrong statistics. We tend, for example, to look at the average competitiveness within a given industry, and that is inappropriate. What we should be looking at is how competitive are the smaller, more localized players within that industry. And one interesting exercise that I've done is looking at, in the United States and Canada, at their data set on industries. It's called the North American Industrial Classification System. And there's, in those 1,100 categories, if you ask the question, in how many of these categories do we have more examples of competitive large business than small, the answer is 7. That is, in 1,093 categories, we have more examples of competitive small businesses. Now, what are those 7 examples of really uncompetitive industries? Well, there are things you would expect one couldn't do at a very local level, like running a central banking system or missiles or rockets, or another example would be running a nuclear power station. But interestingly, nothing in those 7 categories has anything to do with food. To turn that around, in every food category that we have in North America, we have more examples of small-scale success than large-scale success. And when one moves internationally, the presence of local success stories is frankly even greater because of the nature of their economies. Now, a fourth finding is that we are not just talking about American local food. We tend to sometimes think that local food is, for the crunchy, groovy, Birkenstock-wearing hippies of the United States who have extra disposable income in their hands. But in point of fact, local food is fast becoming a global phenomenon involving rich and poor communities. The picture you see in front of you now is of Sylvia Banda, who is in some ways the local food impresario of Zambia. She has a catering company. She has a restaurant. She trains young chefs how to cook local food. She has her own cooking show in Zambia. These photos here are from Cabbages and Condoms in Thailand. Cabbages and Condoms is a kind of edgy consortium of 12 local restaurants and resort centers. They use their profits, amounting to about $2 million a year, to support reproductive rights and AIDS education. Another example is the Fundación Paraguaya Financial Self-Sufficient Organic Farm School. And this is a for-profit high school in Paraguay that basically teaches kids there how to run competitive local enterprises. They have 16 enterprises in all that the kids are getting their education in, things like dairy, hotels, restaurants, farmers market stands, and they use those enterprises to underwrite the school so the kids don't have to pay any tuition. The last finding is, and this was also flagged by John, that we see enormous economic development potential in supporting local food. The slide here is not from this study, although we cite it, but it's a study that I did for about 2 years ago for the Fair Food Foundation in Detroit. And we asked the question, what would be the impacts if there was a 20% shift of Detroit residents to eat Detroit-grown food? And that turned out it would create 5,000 jobs. And if you got the 5 surrounding counties around Detroit to do the same thing, that would create 40,000 jobs. So clearly, there is an important economic development piece to all of this. Another example of this is from Hardwick, Vermont. Many of you may have seen a piece by Marion Burroughs in the New York Times almost a year ago where she talked about how in this community of about 3,000 people, the farmers self-organized to move into organics. They also are helping one another to support value-added, high-quality food products and companies like Vermont Soy, Jasper Hill Farm Cheese, Pete's Greens, which is a CSA involving 30 farmers, high mowing organic seeds. And as a result of these activities, Hardwick, Vermont, again, a community of 3,000 people, has basically produced about 100 jobs in a period of economic turndown in the United States. So as the United States, as President Obama begins to think more carefully about where are we going to stimulate our economy on the cheap, I think local food enterprises become more and more important. Now I want to turn now to the next piece of our findings, and that has to do with competitiveness. I think a lot of people believe that local food enterprises are cute and they have nice food, but at the end of the day, they're not really that competitive against the big global players. And in point of fact, we found about 15 different categories in which local food businesses actually did have some competitive advantages over global food businesses. Now, I don't have time to go through all 15, but I wanted to briefly share just 5 of them. So the first is on quality. I think most of us understand that food is not infinite, is not, just one thing, that one kind of food is often more tastier than another, and quality really matters in food. And a lot of our community food enterprises really played at the quality card. The picture here is of Andrew Akawenze, who runs a small-scale fishing operation and then smokes the fish and sells the smoked fish to farmers markets in Toronto. And he says that by the time my competitors are getting the bone off their fish, my customers are eating mine. So he really emphasizes freshness. Another example of quality is Judy Wicks with the White Dog Cafe. White Dog is a restaurant in Philadelphia. It's been sort of ground zero for the local economy movement there. It does about a $5 to $6 million a year business. And I think what customers at the White Dog really appreciate is that this is a place where one gets unique service, a wonderful experience, and it's a lot of fun. And that idea of fun and a profound experience can only happen at a one-of-a-kind kind of venue that the local businesses can provide. A second strategy that community food enterprises are using is aggregation. That is that even when you're unable to compete effectively enterprise by enterprise, when you team up together, you can achieve any economy of scale that's necessary in order to compete better globally. So an example of this that we have, and this is the picture here, is of a farmers cooperative in Mississippi, the Indian Springs Cooperative. It's brought together 36 African-American farmers since the civil rights days. They have pooled together their resources to build a $500,000 facility for cleaning, sorting, and packaging their organic fruit products. And they reckon that were it not for Indian Springs, they would be soon out of business. And this is the reason why they are able to bring into their otherwise poor counties in Mississippi $5,000 to $10,000 of economic activity per week. Aggregation doesn't have to just be done with cooperatives. One of our examples is Appalachian Harvest Network, and that picture there many of you recognize as Anthony Floccavento. Anthony organized 70 tobacco farmers to work together and one, convert themselves from tobacco growing into organic fruits and vegetable growing, but also to market as a group more effectively to Whole Foods and U-Crops, which is a chain in Virginia, and also to sell their produce to universities like Washington and Lee. Distribution is another area where local businesses are gaining an important competitive advantage. This slide here summarizes the research of Stuart Smith at the University of Maine, who basically points out that in the year 1900, when someone spent $1 on food at the local market, 40 cents went to the farmer and the rest went to inputs and distribution. And if you fast forward to today, it's about 7 cents to the farmer and 73 cents for distribution. Those 73 cents are things like refrigeration, packaging, transportation, insurance, advertising, middle people, things that have nothing to do with food. Now, whenever you get a distribution number that is very large relative to production, there is an opportunity for cost-effective localization. And this is where a company like the Oklahoma Food Co-op has stepped in. The Oklahoma Food Co-op links farmers and buyers throughout the state of Oklahoma. They have one day a month dedicated to where they pick things up from their farmers, package it, and distribute it to 38 sites. Their distribution costs are not 73 cents on the dollar, they are 18 cents on the dollar. And this very efficient distribution concept is now being imitated in Texas, Idaho, Iowa, Michigan, even outside the United States and Canada. It's gaining some traction. Vertical integration is a fourth strategy that many local businesses are using. This picture here is from Zingerman's Delicatessen in Ann Arbor. Zingerman started about 20 years ago as a pretty run-of-the-mill delicatessen. On their first day, they sold about $100 worth of corned beef sandwiches. And as they got bigger, they thought, okay, are we going to become a chain like Schlotzsky's? And they said no. What we really want to do is we want to grow deeper. We don't want to lose our links to the people of Ann Arbor. They're the ones who have made us a great business all along. These are the reasons why we enjoy our business. So we're not going to become a big chain, but we are going to diversify, and we're going to grow deep. And so what they did is they systematically looked at things coming into the deli, and they grew new businesses. So they needed bread. They created a bakery. They need cheese. They created a creamery. They need coffee. They created a coffee roasting company. They looked at things coming out of the deli and saw new business opportunities. So, for example, They made great coffee cakes. Why not create a mail order business out of that? They could take their food and put it into a higher-end sit-down restaurant. They could take their customer services and teach other businesses how to do that in what they call Zing Train. So in all, Zingerman's is now 9 related businesses. Their annual sales are getting close to about $30 million a year, and they employ 550 people in Ann Arbor. The last strategy that I did want to highlight here is that local businesses are beginning to compete for the low-income consumer. Now, it is true that when you go to a typical farmer's market, the things you're going to find there are going to be somewhat more expensive than what you find in the mainstream store. But one's economic analysis should not stop there, because for the typical low-income consumer, the current buying options are the corner bodega or a filling station or some awful food source that's expensive and has low-quality food. And so when you compare food deserts, a lot of the newer farmers markets are actually providing more competitive food options to those consumers. So this picture here is from the largest farmers market in the United States, the Green Markets in New York City. There are currently 46 markets in the Green Markets umbrella now. Half of them operate right now in the middle of winter. 14 of these markets actually have the majority of their sales going to people using WIC coupons or food stamps. Now, the last piece that I want to go through is how some of these challenges become opportunities. There are clearly areas where local businesses still don't have the scale to compete against the bigger food players on the planet. But in some of these areas, local food enterprises have very cleverly reshaped these challenges into great new assets for their business. And I'll give you just a couple of examples of what I mean here. One is triple bottom line performance of community food enterprises. Now, most of us understand that when you are attentive to labor and environmental rights, it costs more money or often costs more money. This might be seen as undesirable, but I think for a growing number of community food enterprises, this gives them the competitive advantage over the less attentive to labor and environmental standards global players. In other words, consumers are increasingly interested in this kind of performance. And an example of this is Swantonberry Farms, strawberry growers in California. Swantonberry Farms has 50 farm workers working there, and Jim Cochran, the head of Swantonberry, remarkably actually invited the United Farm Workers Union to come in and unionize his workforce because he thought it would be a boost to sales. And it's proved to be that way. Swantonberry now is, besides being, 4 very large farms, it's 14 farmers market stands, it's 2 U-Pick sites, it's a bunch of major supermarket relationships. And Jim not only has supported unionization, but he sees many of his workers becoming the next generation of owners of this farm. Another example is capitalization. This picture here is from Weaver Street Market, a consumer co-op in Research Triangle in North Carolina. There are 12,000 consumers who own a little piece of Weaver Street Market. Now, the interesting thing is when Weaver Street was first built, it was built right next to a conventional grocery store. Were they worried about the competition there? Well, a little bit. But at the end of the day, what's interesting is that because they had limited capital resources, they had to be clever. So they created a consumer co-op. And people's ownership stake in the consumer co-op now makes them loyal customers. So even when there's a great deal at the Food Lion next to Weaver Street, do they go shopping there? Well, not necessarily, because at the end of the year, the consumer co-op owners get a patronage rebate for all the times they have made their purchases in the store. And these consumers are the best marketers that the store has as well. So a local capitalization actually can cement consumer loyalty. Here's another point about capitalization. Right now, I think the biggest obstacle that is facing community food enterprises is the absence of capital. Basically, local businesses are about half of our economy, and none of our pension funds are going into those businesses right now. I think what community food enterprises reminds us of is that if we start working on public policies to begin to deliver some of those pension funds back to local food enterprises, this movement could grow spectacularly. The picture I have here is of the Mercantile in Powell, Wyoming, which is a local stock general department store, and in a way is a model for the kinds of local stock companies that a number of our community food enterprises are considering becoming. The last point I want to talk about is batch size. You know, local food enterprises do have to deal with smaller batches, and for many that's a source of inefficiency. But at Laurence Meats, smaller batch size also is a real advantage because it allows the small-scale meat processing plant in Cannon Falls, Minnesota, to match small orders with small producers. It gives them the ability to do unique tailor-ordered slaughter of, say, elk and bison, and it allows just-in-time delivery of these meats, which ensures freshness. So I think that's a perfect segue to hear from one of our representatives, one of the 24 people we profiled, and that is Mike Lorenz of Laurence Meats. And I should mention that Laurence Meats is, in fact, a family-owned business. After Mike graduated from University of Wisconsin with a bachelor's degree in food science, he stepped into the business, and he is now an active practitioner not only in thinking about small-scale meat production nationwide, but also in the local food movement nationwide. And he's going to tell you a lot about his own experience, and I'm going to turn it over now to Michael.
Thank you, Michael. As Michael said, that we own a small meat processing plant here in Cannon Falls, Minnesota. The business was started by my mom and dad in 1968 and was turned over to my brother and I in 1997. And as we looked to see how we could grow our business and move forward, we decided that we needed to move from a non-inspected meat facility to a USDA-inspected facility. So we built a new processing plant in 2000. And to do that, we had to raise some capital, so we went out to do a private placement. We got 10 shareholders that are primarily friends and family to raise $450,000, and we leveraged another $200 million in debt, and we built this processing plant and began to process meat for local farmers. Now, we've grown since then. We're up to 60 employees. We've had a couple near misses with running out of money. We've had to do another private placement. We've got a couple strategic subordinated debt deals, but we are now to a consistent profitable trend, and the future looks good for us. We think we are going to be able to find the right place to be. So one of the things that really differentiates us from other meat processors is that we are so much smaller. We go at a significantly slower rate. To put it in perspective, our facility does about 7,000 animals a year. Right now, we could maybe do as many as 10,000. The typical large beef producer or beef processing plant right now is being built at a rate of 5,000 a day. That rate of speed is one of the biggest complaints that I have of our industry is to try to get 5,000 animals processed in a day, you got to be going pretty hard. And when I say that we're more humane to our animals and our employees, we're cleaner, and we do more what our customer wants, that's all a function of time. I feel that we have more time if we have an animal that balks. We don't have to start beating on it right away because we have time. If we have, we don't have to expose our employees to cumulative stress injuries so much because they have time to go to different roles, and we can cross-train them, and we do multiple species. And I believe we're cleaner just because, as a function of rate of process, that we have more time to inspect and get the work done. So I think that our rate of speed in which we do the work gives us the potential to do products at a higher standard. So the customers we work for, because we're primarily a fee-for-service co-packer, we still work with individual farmers like we did ever since 1968, where Farmer Joe brings in one beef and we cut it up and make it into 4 different bundles and they can sell it to their friends and family. Although that's about 20% of our business now, we do work with 300 or 400 local farmers to do that, and they do direct sales to the people that eat it. And then we work with some larger branded partners that we do some branded things. Crop, Organic Valley is one of our larger customers that we do their organic prairie line of beef and do some pork and chicken for the processing for them. And we work with resellers and aggregators like Thousand Hills Cattle Company does a 100% grass-fed beef program that he aggregates production of several small farmers that are doing 100% grass production and sells all of that product within about 90 miles of our facility here. One of the things that we are really struggling with is what is the right size. The big plants are so big now and they're so efficient, and they can save, they can generate revenue off of every little thing because they can get such a good pile of it. So the finding the right size is one of the things that we really struggle with in meat processing. If you're too small, one of the things you can't do is meet your compliance obligations. Now that USDA has moved to a science-based HACCP program, it almost takes a full-time person just to meet up with the needs of the USDA person. And if you're only doing a little bit of meat products, you can't spread that person's salary over that amount of meat. So it's easy to be too small. And along with that, the market is so big that we have to have some ability to do some to meet some supply. Within 90 miles of Cannon Falls, there's 700,000 beef consumed annually. Our plant can do 7,000 right now. That's 1% market share in our facility, and there are some people that think that we're getting big, and in the scope of the market that we deal in, we feel that we're very small. And then, of course, if you get too big, then you become beholden to your market, and you have to just keep doing whatever you can do to get the volume, just to fulfill the obligations that you have. You can't be nimble and work with multi-species like a facility like ours can. So one of the things that we see is how greatly the size affects your pricing opportunities. Michael gave that slide, and he said that 60% of the money goes to distribution, and it's going to be a larger and larger percentage. Well, in the meat business, I did a little work with the Iowa State University and their ag economics department, and we determined that last year, the average farmer that was selling the select beef on the open market received $6 more for the meat received $6 more for the livestock than the meat that came from that livestock was worth at the processing plant's door. And this is a commodity. This is based on commodity stuff. And that stuff is moved very quickly, very efficiently through full trucks to distribution and goes into retail. And retailers traditionally put between 35 and 50% margin on there. Most specialty stores or major grocery stores have a 30 to 50% margin goal at their meat department. Now, the larger box stores are putting 15 to 18%. I found it very interesting in Michael's presentation that he talked about the co-op that's doing direct sale that is at an 18% margin. That's got a huge effect on what the ultimate price of the product will be, and will really be a key factor in how we're able to bring more and more food to the masses. How can we be the right size? As the slide says, our challenge to be the right size and not get caught, but to get it at a decent price. And this whole margin thing is such a big issue. If we think about a 50% margin, a specialty retailer putting a 50% margin on it, if you can see on the left side of this slide, it says a commodity product that's delivered to that store at a $2 cost at a 50% margin is sold to the customer at $4. I work very closely with a retailer that this is their model, 50% margin. Well, if I and my farmers develop a niche product and deliver that to that store for $4, similar product but locally raised with some other higher quality attributes, and that costs $4, that means the retail price is $8. So if we use this analogy and say that it's grass-fed ground beef, I argue to the retailer, why do you charge $2 more to sell our product than the commodity product? And we're beginning to get a little bit of traction in this and going to the income per transaction, where you can see on the right side where we have a commodity price of $2 to $4 is a $2 retail profit. So you'd say to them, why don't you put a $2.25 unit markup on it, and you make more money, but you have a much lower margin. And it's a bit of an uphill climb because so many of the conventional retailers are based on their manager's performance on this margin goal. And I've even run into this same math problem with individual co-ops, that they're told that they have to hit a margin goal. So the more expensive the product is that we deliver them, the higher their transactional revenue is. So you can see that here's the $2 and $2.25, and that compares to $8 versus $2.25. It gives us a much better opportunity to sell that product. So some lessons that we're learning as we're going through this whole deal is, I agree with Michael wholeheartedly that local does not have to equal small, and conversely, big does not have to equal bad, which some people think that big businesses are bad, and I think crop is the perfect example of big businesses that have a great social conscience. Local business operate both locally and non-locally. I'm one of our largest customers right now. We sell Berkshire pork that we make into sausage into the LA market. So trucks that bring produce to Minnesota, citrus and stuff, can turn around and take pork products back. And we can get very efficient distribution cost because that's an empty truck that's going back to California. So that defining local is can be challenging. And then also we feel that we can't be too righteous. As a meat processor, we have to deal with all those that come to us, and we tend to lean towards more sustainable products, more organic and grass-fed and those type things. But we think the most important thing is we keep our doors open to to be able to service them. So in the effort to keep our doors open, we will do work with people that, whoever we need to do work with. But one thing is constant. We always treat all of our animals humanely. And then the final word is while we're trying to do this, there is no reason why we can't do well while we're doing good. So with that, I will turn it back over to John.
Thanks, Mike. Very informative. Appreciate that presentation. Now I'd like to take us to wrap up. I'd like to introduce Marty Gorenser. Marty is the manager of the National Good Food Network, which is an initiative of the Wallace Center. I spoke a little bit about the network earlier. Marty's got a background in the for-profit sector with Gerber Foods, has worked with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Michigan State University, and brings quite a bit of expertise to the network, and we're glad to have her on this webinar. So, Marty?
Thanks, John, and thanks, Michael and Mike Lorentz for your time today. We really appreciate your time on this NGFN webinar. The content and information you shared will be of great value, I know, to all of the folks listening today and to the many people that are part of the NGFN. I had just a few things to share on the NGFN. Jeff, could you advance the slide? Thanks. On the NGFN, and then we'll go on to Q&A, any questions that you had. For those of you not familiar with the National Good Food Network, we work in regional food systems, self-defined regional food systems, much like what Michael and Mike both talked about. There isn't a strong definition to local or regional. What our goal is to connect to medium and small farmers, including those socially disadvantaged, those interested in making a livelihood out of agriculture and out of their farm operation or their business operation. And the work that we do in our regions, we have 10 regions mobilized through the network, is connect those folks to what we call scaled-up enterprise, where more producers benefit, the communities are more viable, where we're working with regional folks like regional grocers, institutions, and food service organizations, someone that groups that can help us move enough volume from that farm on into the warehouses and out to the folks in the community that are currently without the healthy food access that many of us know about in our rural and our urban communities. Can you advance this slide, please? And the way our network works is the Wallace Center operates as the national, what we call coordinating organization for these 10 regions and many partners of the network. We bring together the different audiences that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the participants of the value chain. That's a combination of for-profit, non-profit. We, of course, do a lot of work with USDA. They've been of great help to us and partners with us in many ways through the network. We share this information then through outreach mechanisms, much like this webinar today, our e-newsletter, our database, ngfn.org, and through knowledge models and case studies, what Michael and John and team put together through the CFE project are of great value to our growers and our folks working out on the ground mobilizing these efforts. As you know, they don't have the time to do much more than grow the product. And so to have folks with the knowledge, the time and the expertise, and to have folks like the Kellogg Foundation and Gates Foundation invest some money into getting these models out to the folks can be the difference, as you know, in the livelihoods of a lot of these folks. So that's kind of the type of work that the Good Food Network is involved in. We're what we say is in the first bullet, we're a learning network and a doing network. There's an awful lot of work going out on the ground, and part of what we try to do with these webinars is share those regional stories so that you folks can learn from what has been going on in different regions around the country. Can you advance the slide again, please? Just to give you an idea of where we're at in the country. Again, it's 10 different regions. We're along the West Coast, a couple in California, 2 in New Mexico, 6 different states in operation in the Midwest, working with Anthony Flacavento in the Southeast, and then we have 12 states in the Northeast, and doing some work as well in New York City with Karen Karp and Sustainable Food Lab. We have on ngfn.org, and at the end of this presentation, we have a list of the regional leads. Next slide, please. The structure of the Good Food Network, just so you can sort of see maybe in one slide what I've just talked through for the last 5 minutes. Maybe it will be clearer for you. The national coordinating work is done primarily through the Wallace Center and certainly with external partners, consultants, and even teams of folks. Like BALLE is an example where Michael Shuman, did some work with the Wallace Center. So teams of folks, internal staff, and consultants that do a lot of national coordination to support this effort and assist this effort that's going out on the ground within our 8 regional networks. We also have two different regional networks of activity going on in a partnership with a Cisco corporation in Kansas City, Kansas, and in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We also have a food safety subcommittee that's working in partnership with the Wallace Center, the Good Food Network regional leads, and with USDA and many other partners to assemble information and mobilize food safety efforts on the ground. Next slide, please. Here's a look at our regional teams. I think I just went through a number of these. This, again, it's on your slide. It's also on ngfn.org. I encourage you to go to their websites, learn more about the work that they're doing and the work they're doing through the Good Food Network. There's an awful lot of learning here. And in partnership with CFE, hopefully we're sharing some useful knowledge for you all. Next slide, please. And the advisory council that has worked very closely with us at the Wallace Center to build this network from the ground up and continues to help advise it is listed here as well. Again, we have all of the regional leads as part of this advisory council, and then some other folks who have been specifically involved in on-the-ground work or developing case studies and models, and have helped us build this network and bring it to where it is today. Next slide. So just in wrapping this up, where we see the integration with the community food enterprise and all the work Michael Shuman and John and folks have put into this is that we have a specific focus on what I call content, knowledge, and research. This information is extremely important to our growers and to different participants in the value chain. Cisco Corporation and the Cisco operating companies are a good example of the folks who have learned from us sort of how to source local sustainable product from our medium-sized growers and move it into their warehouse in a values-based value chain approach. The regional leads certainly have created models of their own, and some of the regional leads were part of the CFE case study. And the communication and sharing of information is what builds our regions and builds the work that we do across regions. There's the evaluation of metrics that's very important to the work that we do to see that what we've done has useful outcomes. It's certainly important to the funders, supporters of our work. But more importantly, it's important to be able to track what we've done and document it, like what the community food enterprise projects have done, so that we can move forward in a more focused and strategic way. And then certainly at the national network through the Wallace Center, we're working very hard to coordinate our efforts so that we're all kind of moving in the same direction as we build these local and regional food systems, share our learning, and create new knowledge and new work together. I think John was... Okay, thank you.
Yeah, why don't I take us into question and answer now? As you can see on your screen, there is a question and answer box. There's been some dialogue there. I picked out a few that I thought would be good for us to talk about verbally here. If you have more questions, please submit them, and we'll see how much time we can get to them. So I've got one here from Mike Lorentz. Let me see, where did it get out to? Well, I think, Mike, the question was, I'm not reading it verbatim, it was around, sounds like you run two different enterprises, and that was slaughtering and processing. And the question was, do you think that those two can be operated economically viably separate, or do you think grouping them is the more beneficial way to go?
Well, yes, we do run both a slaughter and further processing operation. We slaughter beef, pork, and bison here. And we do further processing, sausage making, so we sell fully cooked sausages and everything. So it can be done. One of the points of differentiation that we offer our farmers and our branding partners is that they can bring live animals here and we can convert them into saleable products without having to do all the additional logistics. When you think of these big, massive processing plants, they do very efficient work on slaughter, but then that's all they do is slaughter and fab, and then you have to take meat over to a place that does grinding and a place that does portion cutting, and by the time you add up all the logistics, you have added a lot of costs. So we can use that cost, use that cost as part of our opportunity to overcome our inefficiencies of being smaller.
I think that really gets to the scale issue and finding the balance. Thank you, Mike. Another question, I think, for Michael Shuman and maybe for myself. Do you have any idea how long some of the more established CFEs have been in existence, the ones that we've documented? And are we observing a trend of increasing nationally, and if so, why?
Yeah, I guess I would say that some of these CFCs have been operating for more than 100 years. I mean, some of these international ones are family companies that have very deep roots. But more typically, these companies have been around for, 10, 20, 30 years in some cases. And while I don't think we were not able in our study to really find good data to show whether or not, these in sheer numbers, these enterprises were increasing. I do think that, you can sort of see just, in terms of prominence, these businesses are beginning to gain traction. And, the fact that when Time Magazine, 2 years ago, had on its cover, forget organic, eat local, that something has changed in the zeitgeist that has sort of made these local food and local food businesses more visible. But I think we do need better data to establish their growth rate.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Another one here. Can we cite any other examples or references for community-supported groceries or any of the community-supported restaurants? My off the top of the head response would be in Portland, there's New Seasons Market, which has 7 stores, not technically community-supported, but I think worker-owned to some degree. It's certainly community-responsive and responsible. People's Grocery has been trying to start a store in Oakland, in low-income neighborhoods there. Certainly in Pennsylvania has the Pennsylvania, the innovative retail store financing operation that's financed a number of different small and large stores. I don't know if you'd call them community-supported per se, but they plan on being that way, if not already. Any other response to that, Michael? Grocery stores or community-supported restaurants?
Well, I would add that the National Cooperative Grocers Association is very, very engaged in these issues, and look, I had a little bit of dialogue with a couple of listeners in the last 20 minutes, but this has been a very hard year financially for every business, big and small, local and non-local, and I think the cooperative grocers are among those who recognize that this is it's a clarion call to improve their efficiency and improve their capital base to operate more effectively. But I must say, I've been impressed that more and more local food practitioners, whether they are grocery stores or restaurants, are not just going at it alone. They are seeing the value of entering into networks with similar businesses in their community, the BALLE, or with similar businesses nationally, via some of our networks on this call. And I think that is going to make a difference in their long-term competitiveness.
Great. Thank you. Another question, probably the last one before we have to wrap it up here. What efforts are in place to ensure access to healthy food in low-income communities in the context of Community Food Enterprise or the National Good Food Network? Why don't I ask Marty to respond to the National Good Food Network one and see if Michael has any response from CFE after that.
John, can you hear me?
Yep,
okay.
Sure can.
Could you run through that question just one more time?
Yeah, what efforts are in place to ensure access to healthy food in low-income communities through the NGFN?
Sure. Well, we have a couple regions, actually 3 regions specifically chosen and selected and that we work with, and their specific focus is in an urban and some rural settings where they've got programs in place, testing programs and implementing new programs that will move more food into urban communities without that healthy access. They're utilizing, we're in LA, New York City, some parts of Chicago, and now we're doing some exploration and partnership in Detroit. So those are some where we are working, obviously, with WIC programs. We're working in grocery stores that will work with us. We're working with farmers markets. And some of these programs, you could look at YouTube or go to ngfn.org because some of these programs were highlighted on past webinars. And you can also go to contact@ngfn.org, which will be up at the end of this presentation, if you want to ask more specifics or be connected to those regional leads to get all the details. We will have, in 2010, watch for the upcoming webinars because we will be doing more work around urban areas and food access. So those will be coming up in the coming months.
Great. Thank you, Marty. Michael, a real quick response if you have one, and then we need to wrap this up because we're out of time.
Yeah, I think that really we're on the precipice of a second phase of if you could call this a local food revolution. I think the first phase was about proving concept and getting, people who are willing to pay a little bit more to buy more local food more at the time. And I think, efforts like Mike Lorenz's in mainstream chain stores and efforts of, farmers markets like green markets to reach out to low-income consumers really are trying to now, beat the global competition on price. And I think we're going to see more interesting examples of that in the coming years.
Great. Thank you very much. I think I need to turn this back to Marty to wrap this up and let us know some next steps from the webinar.
Sure. Well, again, thank you, everyone. We had a large group today, and we can see why there was just a lot of great information from Community Food Enterprise, and we thank you again for your time being on this webinar today and sharing this information on this webinar. For more information about anything to do with the Good Food Network or past webinars, any questions you may have, send your questions to contact@ngfn.org. That comes to myself and to Jeff, and we get back to you just as soon as we can. Also, watch the website for upcoming webinars. The next one that we have in February is on Food Alliance. Scott Exel, Executive Director of Food Alliance and advisor to the network, will be on. And any other information or anything else that you would like to know about Community Food Enterprise, please let us know, and we'll get you over to the appropriate websites and get the information